It was a crisp autumn evening in the small town of Maplewood. The kind of evening where the air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves crunched underfoot. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the distant hum of a passing car. But something about that night felt different, like the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jake, a 15-year-old with a wild mop of brown hair and a knack for finding trouble, was out walking his dog, Max. Max was no ordinary dog. He was a scrappy mix of golden retriever and who knows what, with one ear that always flopped over and a nose that could sniff out a cookie from a mile away. Jake and Max were inseparable, partners in every adventure, and tonight was no different. As they strolled along the dimly lit path by the edge of the woods, Max suddenly stopped. His ears perked up, and his tail went rigid. Jake, used to Max's instincts, felt a twinge of curiosity and maybe a little bit of fear. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered, peering into the shadows. Max let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on a spot just beyond the trees. Jake's heart started to race. He tightened his grip on Max's leash and took a cautious step forward. That's when he saw a faint glimmer of light, flickering through the dense trees. It wasn't the warm glow of a campfire or the steady beam of a flashlight. It was something else, something that didn't quite belong. Jake hesitated, but Max tugged on the leash, urging him forward. With a deep breath, Jake followed his four-legged friend into the woods. The light grew brighter, and soon they stumbled upon a clearing. In the center was an old, weathered cabin that Jake had never seen before. It looked abandoned, but the light coming from inside told a different story. Jake's mind raced. Who could be out here in the middle of nowhere? And why? He and Max crept closer, the dry leaves under their feet sounding impossibly loud in the still night. As they reached the cabin, Jake peered through a crack in the wooden shutters. What he saw made his stomach drop. Inside, a group of people sat around a table, their faces obscured by shadows. They were hunched over something, speaking in hushed tones. On the table was a map, and scattered across it were strange objects: an old compass, a rusted key, and what looked like a piece of jewelry. Jake couldn't make out what they were saying, but the intensity of their conversation was unmistakable. Max let out a small whine, and Jake quickly pulled him back. His mind was spinning with questions. Who were these people? What were they doing out here? And what was so important about that map? Before Jake could think of his next move, the door of the cabin creaked open. One of the figures stepped out, a tall man with a hood pulled low over his face. He scanned the woods, and for a moment, Jake thought they'd been spotted. He held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. But the man didn't see them. Instead, he turned and walked toward a hidden trail leading deeper into the forest. Jake knew he should turn back, go home, and forget he ever saw anything. But he also knew that wasn't going to happen. Not with Max by his side and his curiosity burning brighter than ever. This was the start of something big, something that could change everything. And so, with a mix of fear and excitement, Jake and Max set off after the man, not knowing what they would find but certain of one thing: their quiet town of Maplewood was about to reveal its secrets, and they were ready to uncover them. Little did they know, the adventure that lay ahead would test their courage, their friendship, and their very understanding of the world around them. And as they disappeared into the darkness, one thought lingered in Jake's mind: there's no turning back now. Jake and Max moved carefully through the thick underbrush, the only sound their quiet breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The narrow trail twisted and turned, weaving deeper into the forest. The man they were following kept a steady pace, his hooded figure barely visible in the moonlight. Jake's heart pounded with every step, a mix of fear and adrenaline pushing him forward. As they walked, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the first time someone had used this trail. The path was worn, as if many feet had traveled it before. Who were these people, and why were they meeting in secret? The thought made his stomach twist. He'd grown up in Maplewood, a town so small and quiet that even a stray dog would make the local paper. But now, it seemed there were secrets hidden just beneath the surface. Max stayed close to Jake's side, his ears constantly twitching at the slightest sound. Jake gave the dog a reassuring pat, even though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. They had been walking for what felt like forever when the trail suddenly opened up into another clearing. This one was different from the first. It was larger, with a strange circle of stones in the center. The stones were old and moss-covered, arranged in a way that seemed almost deliberate. In the middle of the circle was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, its surface covered in rust and strange markings. The man approached the circle and stopped. He knelt by the metal box and carefully opened it, revealing a small stack of papers and a few other objects Jake couldn't make out from his hiding spot. The man pulled out one of the papers and examined it under the moonlight. He seemed to study it for a long moment before slipping it into his coat pocket. Jake strained to see more, but his angle didn't give him much. He was too far away to make out the details, and he didn't dare move closer. Just then, Max let out a soft, almost imperceptible growl. Jake froze, his pulse quickening. Had Max seen something Jake hadn't? He followed the dog's gaze, scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. At first, he saw nothing. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of another figure. It was a woman, standing just at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden behind a tree. She wasn't one of the people from the cabin, that much was clear. Her posture was tense, like she was waiting for the right moment to step in. She watched the man by the circle of stones with an intensity that made Jake's skin prickle. Who was she? And why was she here? Before Jake could process what was happening, the woman made her move. She stepped out of the shadows, her footsteps deliberate and unhurried. The man by the stones didn't notice her at first. He was too focused on the contents of the metal box. But when she was only a few steps away, he looked up, startled. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice low and edged with warning. The woman didn't flinch. "Neither should you." For a moment, they just stared at each other, the tension between them almost tangible. Jake crouched lower, his mind racing. What was going on? He felt like he was watching a scene from a movie, except this was real, and he was right in the middle of it. The man stood up slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said. "This isn't just about you or me. It's bigger than that." The woman crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "I know exactly what's at stake. And I won't let you put everyone at risk." Jake's curiosity burned. What were they talking about? He tried to piece it together, but the puzzle was missing too many pieces. Max shifted beside him, his eyes still locked on the two figures. Jake gave him a gentle nudge, silently urging him to stay quiet. The man shook his head, his frustration evident. "You can't stop this," he said. "It's already in motion." "Maybe not," the woman replied. "But I can try." She took a step closer, and for a moment, Jake thought there might be a fight. But instead, the man let out a heavy sigh. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the paper he had taken from the box. He held it out toward the woman, his hand trembling slightly. "If you think you can fix this, then take it," he said. "But know this, once you start, there's no going back." The woman hesitated for a moment, then took the paper. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the page quickly. Whatever was on it, it seemed to confirm something for her. She folded it back up and slipped it into her own pocket. "I'll do what I have to," she said, her voice steady. Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving the man alone in the clearing. He stood there for a long moment, staring after her, before finally closing the metal box and placing it back in the circle of stones. Then he, too, melted into the shadows. Jake stayed frozen in place, his mind reeling. He had so many questions, but no answers. Who were these people? What was on that paper? And what did it all mean for Maplewood? As the clearing fell silent once more, Jake knew one thing for certain: this mystery was far from over. And whatever was happening, he and Max were now a part of it. They just had to figure out what to do next. Jake and Max waited in the shadows until the forest was silent again, the weight of what they'd just witnessed pressing down on them. Jake felt like he was standing at the edge of something far bigger than he could understand. The woman's parting words echoed in his head: "I'll do what I have to." What could be so urgent, so dangerous, that it drove two strangers into the middle of the woods at night? Whatever it was, Jake was certain it wasn't over. He stood slowly, brushing dirt off his knees, and gave Max a reassuring pat. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "We need to figure out what's going on." They retraced their steps back to the cabin, moving as quietly as they could. The woods felt different now, less like the familiar trails Jake had explored his whole life and more like a maze of secrets. The clearing with the cabin was empty when they arrived. The group inside had vanished, leaving no trace they'd ever been there. The faint light that had drawn Jake here in the first place was gone, leaving the cabin shrouded in darkness. Jake approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He pushed open the creaky door, half expecting someone to jump out at him. But the cabin was silent, its interior dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. The table was still there, along with the map and the strange objects scattered across it. Jake stepped closer, his eyes scanning the map. It wasn't like any map he'd seen before. The lines and markings didn't resemble the town or the surrounding area. Instead, they seemed to form a maze of symbols and coordinates, with small notes scribbled in the margins. One word caught his eye, circled in bold: Sentinel. Sentinel, Jake whispered to himself. The word sent a chill down his spine. What could it mean? Max sniffed at the objects on the table, his nose lingering on the old compass. Jake picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was heavy and cold, with intricate designs etched into the metal. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle on any direction. Jake frowned. It didn't work like a normal compass, but he had a feeling it was important. Before he could think any further, Max's ears perked up, and he let out a low growl. Jake froze, every nerve on edge. Someone was coming. He quickly grabbed the map and the compass, shoving them into his backpack. Just as he slipped into the shadows at the back of the cabin, the door creaked open again. A man stepped inside, but it wasn't the hooded figure from before. This man was older, with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. He carried a lantern, its light casting eerie shadows on the walls. Jake held his breath, watching as the man approached the table. The man scanned the room, his gaze lingering on the empty table where the map had been. His expression darkened, and he muttered something under his breath. Then, he pulled out a small device from his coat, a sleek, modern gadget that looked completely out of place in the old cabin. The man pressed a button, and a soft beep echoed in the stillness. He held the device up, and a series of lights blinked across its surface. Jake had no idea what it was, but it didn't look like anything good. The man's eyes narrowed as he studied the device, then he slipped it back into his coat and left, his footsteps fading into the night. Jake exhaled slowly, his heart still racing. Whoever that man was, he was searching for something Jake now had. He didn't know what he'd stumbled into, but it was clear he was in over his head. He needed help, but who could he trust? The town was small, and word traveled fast. If he went to the police, they'd think he was making it all up. If he told his parents, they'd forbid him from ever stepping foot in the woods again. There was only one person Jake could think of, his best friend, Sam. Sam was the kind of guy who thrived on solving puzzles and unraveling mysteries. He'd spent countless hours with Jake exploring Maplewood's forgotten corners, always on the lookout for their next big adventure. If anyone could help Jake make sense of the strange map and the cryptic compass, it was Sam. Jake and Max made their way back to town, keeping to the shadows to avoid being seen. When they reached Sam's house, Jake tapped on the window of his friend's room. A moment later, the window slid open, and Sam's face appeared, his eyes widening when he saw Jake. "Dude, what are you doing here?" "It's almost midnight," Sam whispered. "Let me in," Jake said urgently. "I need to show you something." Sam didn't hesitate. He opened the window wider, and Jake climbed inside, Max following close behind. Once they were inside, Jake wasted no time. He pulled the map and compass out of his backpack and spread them on Sam's desk. "Whoa," Sam said, his eyes lighting up. "Where did you get this?" Jake quickly recounted everything that had happened: the cabin, the strange meeting, the metal box, and the two mysterious figures. Sam listened intently, his excitement growing with every word. "This is insane," Sam said when Jake finished. "It sounds like something out of a spy movie." Jake nodded. "I know, but it's real. And I think this map and compass are the key to whatever's going on." Sam leaned in, studying the map closely. "These symbols, they look familiar. I've seen something like this before in that old book about Maplewood's history. It talked about ancient markers and hidden trails that only certain people knew about." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You think this map is connected to that?" Sam shrugged. "It's possible. And this compass, it's definitely not a regular compass. It might be some kind of locator, but it's hard to say without more information." Jake felt a mix of relief and unease. At least he wasn't alone in this anymore. But the more they uncovered, the deeper the mystery seemed to go. Sam pulled out his laptop and started searching for anything related to the symbols on the map. As the hours ticked by, they pieced together fragments of information: old legends, hidden societies, and something called the Sentinel Order. Jake's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. If the map led to something the Sentinel Order was protecting, then they were now caught in the middle of a dangerous game. And with every passing moment, the stakes were getting higher. Just as Sam was about to pull up another document, the screen went dark. Jake and Sam exchanged a confused look. Sam tried restarting the laptop, but it wouldn't turn on. Then, the lights in the room flickered and went out. A sudden chill filled the air, and Max let out a sharp bark. Jake's stomach dropped. Someone or something knew they were getting too close. The sudden darkness in Sam's room felt suffocating. Jake's heart thudded in his chest as he fumbled for his phone, the faint glow of its screen barely illuminating their faces. Max stood at the door, his body tense, ears pinned back. Even Sam, usually the calm and collected one, looked rattled. "What just happened?" Sam whispered, his voice barely audible. Jake shook his head, his eyes darting to the window. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Someone's messing with us." Before Sam could respond, a loud knock echoed from the front door downstairs, followed by a second, more insistent one. Max growled low in his throat, the sound vibrating in the stillness. Jake's stomach twisted. Whoever was at the door wasn't here for a friendly visit. "Stay quiet," Jake mouthed, gesturing for Sam to follow him. They grabbed the map and compass, stuffing them back into Jake's backpack. Carefully, they moved toward the window, Max padding silently behind them. Jake eased the window open, wincing as the old frame creaked slightly. He slipped out first, landing softly on the grass below, then reached up to help Max and Sam. As they crouched behind the bushes, the front door burst open. Heavy footsteps pounded inside, and a gruff voice called out, "Search the place. They're here somewhere." Jake's pulse raced. They couldn't stay. Motioning for Sam and Max to follow, he led them toward the woods at the edge of Sam's backyard. They moved quickly, the darkness cloaking their escape. Once they were deep enough into the forest, Jake slowed down, trying to catch his breath. "Who are those guys?" Sam asked, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But they're after the map and compass. We can't let them get it." Sam nodded, his fear now mixed with determination. "So, what's the plan?" Jake pulled out the map, the faint light of his phone casting a soft glow over the strange symbols and coordinates. "We follow this," he said. "Whatever's at the end of this map, it's important. And if those people are willing to break into your house for it, then it must be something they don't want us to find." Sam glanced at Max, who was watching the forest with unblinking eyes. "Looks like we don't have much of a choice." Guided by the map and the erratic needle of the compass, they navigated the forest, the symbols slowly aligning with landmarks. They passed an old, hollow tree, a stream that wound like a silver ribbon, and finally, a massive boulder marked with the same intricate designs from the map. Jake ran his fingers over the markings on the boulder, feeling a strange warmth radiate from the stone. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're close." As if in response, the compass needle suddenly stopped spinning, pointing directly at the base of the boulder. Jake and Sam exchanged a glance before they began to dig, their hands scraping away layers of dirt and leaves. After what felt like an eternity, their fingers hit something solid, a metal hatch, similar in design to the box Jake had seen in the clearing. Sam found a latch and pulled it open with a groan. A narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness. Jake hesitated for only a moment before descending, Max right behind him. Sam followed, the hatch closing above them with a soft thud. The air was cool and damp, and the walls were lined with ancient symbols glowing faintly in the dark. The staircase ended in a cavernous room, its center dominated by a stone pedestal. On top of the pedestal sat another metal box, similar to the one in the clearing but larger and more ornate. Jake approached cautiously, his breath catching as he lifted the lid. Inside was a crystalline orb, pulsing softly with a light that seemed to come from within. It was mesmerizing, but there was something unsettling about it too, as if it were alive. "What is that?" Sam whispered, his eyes wide. Before Jake could respond, a voice echoed through the chamber, low and commanding. "You've gone far enough." They spun around to see the woman from the clearing standing at the entrance to the room, flanked by two men in dark coats. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes locked onto the orb with a mix of fear and determination. "You don't understand what you found," she said, stepping closer. "That orb contains a power that was never meant to be unleashed. The Sentinel Order has guarded it for centuries, keeping it hidden from those who would misuse it." Jake's mind reeled. "Then why did you take the map?" The woman's gaze hardened. "Because someone in the Order betrayed us. They planned to use the orb's power for their own gain. I needed to get to it first, to keep it safe." One of the men stepped forward, his hand resting on a concealed weapon. "Hand over the orb," he demanded. "It's not safe in your hands." Jake glanced at Sam, then at the orb. He could feel its weight, not just in his hands but in the air around them. Max growled, his stance protective. "You'll have to trust me," Jake said, gripping the orb tighter. "If this thing is so dangerous, then you shouldn't have let it get this far." The woman hesitated, then nodded slightly. "You're right. But if you truly want to help, then you'll have to make a choice. The orb can't stay here." Before Jake could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, and the glowing symbols on the walls flared brighter. The cavern seemed to hum with energy, as if the orb's presence had awakened something ancient. "There's no time," the woman said urgently. "We need to destroy it." Jake's mind raced. Could he trust her? Every instinct told him this was bigger than anything he'd ever imagined, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let the orb fall into the wrong hands. In one swift motion, he raised the orb and hurled it against the pedestal. The crystalline surface shattered, releasing a blinding light that filled the chamber. The ground shook violently, and for a moment, it felt like the entire world was coming apart. When the light faded, the cavern was silent. The orb was gone, its power dissipated. The woman stood still, her expression a mix of relief and sorrow. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "The world is safe for now." Jake felt a strange sense of calm, as if a great weight had been lifted. But as they climbed back to the surface, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he saw a flicker of light, like the orb's energy had found a new home. As they walked back to town, Jake glanced at Sam and Max. They had faced the unknown together and come out stronger. But deep down, Jake knew that Maplewood's secrets were far from over. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the treetops, Jake, Sam, and Max finally emerged from the woods, exhausted but relieved to see the familiar rooftops of Maplewood in the distance. The events of the night felt like a blur, a surreal adventure that left them both shaken and changed. They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts. Jake glanced at Sam, who was rubbing his eyes, still trying to process everything. "Think anyone would believe us?" Jake asked, half joking. Sam gave a tired laugh. "Not a chance." "Hey, Mom, Dad, guess what? We saved the world from an ancient, glowing orb." "Yeah, that'll go over well." Jake smiled, but the weight of what they'd done lingered. They had stumbled into a world of hidden societies and ancient power, a world that most people would never know existed. But despite the danger and the fear, they had made it through together. And somehow, that made it all feel worth it. Max trotted ahead, his tail wagging as if the night's events hadn't fazed him in the slightest. Jake couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for his loyal companion. Max had been with him every step of the way, fearless and dependable. Jake gave a low whistle, and Max slowed down, waiting for them to catch up. As they reached the edge of town, Sam stopped and turned to Jake. "What do we do now?" he asked. Jake thought for a moment. "We keep this between us. The less people know, the safer everyone will be." Sam nodded in agreement. "Yeah, you're right. But what about those people from the Order? They know we were there." Jake's expression hardened. "If they come looking, we'll deal with it. But I have a feeling they've got bigger problems now. That orb was the key to whatever power they were after, and it's gone." Sam sighed, looking back toward the woods. "I still can't believe all this was happening right under our noses. Makes you wonder what else is out there." Jake followed his gaze, the forest now bathed in morning light, looking peaceful and ordinary. But he knew better. The woods held secrets, some of which they had uncovered, and others that would remain hidden, at least for now. They parted ways at Sam's house, agreeing to meet later. Jake and Max continued toward home, the quiet streets of Maplewood gradually coming to life as the town woke up. By the time they reached Jake's house, the weight of the night's events was catching up with him. He slipped inside quietly, grateful that his parents were still asleep. In his room, Jake sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his backpack. Inside were the remnants of their adventure, the map, the strange compass, and the weight of a secret that would stay with him forever. He pulled out the compass, watching as the needle spun lazily before settling on a fixed direction. Even without the orb, it seemed to have a purpose, as if it was leading him somewhere new. Jake set the compass down and leaned back, his eyes heavy. Max curled up at his feet, letting out a contented sigh. As Jake drifted off to sleep, he felt a sense of closure, knowing they had done everything they could to protect their town and maybe even the world. Days turned into weeks, and life in Maplewood returned to its usual quiet rhythm. School, chores, and weekend hangouts with Sam filled Jake's days. But every so often, he'd catch a glimpse of something, a shadow moving in the woods, a strange symbol carved into an old tree, and he'd be reminded of the night that changed everything. Sam, ever the curious one, continued to research the Sentinel Order and its history. He uncovered bits and pieces of old records and legends, piecing together a story that stretched back centuries. They learned that the Order had been formed to protect powerful artifacts, like the orb, from falling into the wrong hands. Over time, their mission had become corrupted, leading to the events Jake and Sam had witnessed. Despite the danger they'd faced, Jake found himself grateful for the experience. It had tested him in ways he never imagined, pushing him to be braver, smarter, and more resourceful. And it had shown him the strength of his bond with Max and Sam, a friendship that could weather even the most extraordinary challenges. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake and Sam sat on the hill overlooking the town. Max lay between them, his head resting on his paws. "Do you think it's really over?" Sam asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Jake thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe for now. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the world is full of mysteries. And as long as there are people like us, there's always going to be someone to uncover them." Sam grinned. "Here's to the next adventure." Jake chuckled, clinking an imaginary glass with his friend. To the next adventure. As they sat there, the stars beginning to twinkle above them, Jake felt a sense of peace. They had faced the unknown and come out stronger. And whatever the future held, he knew they were ready for it. Together, they would face whatever came their way, knowing that sometimes the greatest adventures happen when you least expect them. The night deepened, and the town of Maplewood settled into its quiet rhythm once again. But in the hearts of two friends and a loyal dog, the spirit of adventure burned bright, ready to lead them wherever the path might take them next.